The Texas sun burned low over the horizon, spilling red and gold across the open prairie. Dust clung to every shadow, and the creak of leather, and the tired stomp of horses filled the air around the camp of Comanche raiders. For weeks, whispers had spread across the frontier about captives taken, about women sold like trinkets for rifles or whiskey. Jedediah Cole, a rancher with a scarred past and a restless soul, rode into that camp with 10 silver, dollars rattling in his pocket and a weight heavier than the mountains pressing on his chest. Jedediah was not a man who sought trouble, but neither was he one to look away from it. His father had been a soldier, his mother a preacher's daughter, and between the Bible verses and battle scars, Jedediah had been raised to believe that a man's worth wasn't measured in cattle or coin. It was measured in what he was willing to stand up for. And when he heard of 2 young Comanche women being passed around from one camp to another, he knew he couldn't ride on by. The trade was rough, ugly. The Comanche men laughed, mocking the tall rancher who laid down his silver with a quiet steel in his eyes. They told him the girls weren't worth even the dust at his boots. Yet when the exchange was done, the 2 women stood at his side, silent and trembling, their eyes dark pools of suspicion and fear. One was older, perhaps 20, with fire in her gaze, though her lips pressed tight against any word of thanks. The other was younger, barely more than a girl, her face streaked with tears, her spirit bruised but not broken. Jedediah didn't speak much that first night. He made a small fire, set out water, and gave them what food he had. They didn't touch it at first, and he didn't force them. He simply sat near the firelight, whittling a stick into nothing, letting the prairie winds carry the silence. In his heart, he wondered if he'd done right. $10 wasn't much to a man with a herd of longhorns, but it was everything to women who had been bought and sold like cattle. As the night deepened, coyotes howled in the distance, and the younger one crept closer to the fire. She didn't speak English, but she pointed at herself and said softly, "Naya." The older one followed, her chin raised, her voice stronger, "Ahyoka." Jedediah nodded, tipping his hat. "Jed," he said simply. No speeches, no questions, just names under the stars. That night marked the beginning of something none of them could have imagined. For Naya and Ahyoka, it was the first step away from chains of fear. For Jedediah, it was the first spark of a bond that would test his courage, challenge his loneliness, and open his heart to love stronger than gold. But the prairie was unforgiving, and men with greed in their hearts were never far away. What Jed had done was more than an act of mercy. It was the lighting of a fuse. And when the world around them caught fire, they would discover whether their fragile trust could survive the storm. Weeks turned into months, and the ranch, that had once been a lonely stretch of fences and cattle, grew alive with the laughter and footsteps of Naya and Ahyoka. Though words were slow to come between them, a language of gestures, smiles, and patient lessons began to build a bridge. Jed taught them how to ride bareback across the fields, how to mend fences with wire and grit. In turn, they showed him herbs for wounds, songs that floated on the evening breeze, and the quiet strength of survival. At first, Jed's neighbors muttered behind his back. Some called him a fool. Others whispered worse, that he'd brought wild women into his home, that he'd lose everything for the sake of pity. But Jedediah was not a man who bent to the gossip of men whose hearts were small. He knew what he saw in Naya's shy smile when she found her voice in broken English, and in Ahyoka's fierce spirit when she rode beside him across the hills, like a queen unbound. Danger was never far. Raiders came searching, men with rifles and hunger in their eyes, believing the women still belonged to them. One night, fire lit the horizon, and Jed's herd scattered in terror. He fought with everything he had, steel, fists, and the stubborn courage that had carried him through years of loneliness. But it was not his strength alone that saved them. Naya's warning cry, Ahyoka's steady aim with a bow, and the bond they had built turned the tide. Together, they stood against the storm. When the smoke cleared and the prairie quieted, Jed looked upon the 2 women not as burdens or strangers, but as the heart of his home. They were no longer captives, and he was no longer just a rancher. Something greater had taken root, something worth more than cattle, coin, or even gold. It was love, fierce and unyielding, born of fire and trial. The frontier would never forget Jedediah Cole, the rancher who paid $10 for 2 women. But history would not tell it right. It wasn't a purchase, it was a rescue, a chance, and ultimately a love story that proved the strongest treasures in this world aren't dug from the earth or minted in silver. They are found in the hearts we dare to fight for.